indeed. And I was particularly interested in your comments there about the very long term, talking not just about 2020, but talking about 2040. And it reminds me that, just last week here in Abu Dhabi, we had such a great example of the long-term nature of this business with the 75-year concessions for Abu Dhabi's oil exploration and production, with a number of Western oil companies. Those 75-year concessions coming to an end, of course, are all waiting and watching to see what happens with those. But it does illustrate, I think, and reinforce the fact that it is a very long-term game that we're playing, and that we have to think long-term and shut out some of the noise that tends to obliterate that. And indeed, these are some of the issues that are going to be discussed now in what is our first panel discussion of the day. Energy security as new trade corridors emerge to meet 2020 demand. And for this session, I'm delighted to say I shall hand you over now to the very capable hands of the managing partner of Gulf Intelligence, Sean Evers. Sean.
Thank you, Richard. I think I'm switched on. Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to invite back to the stage His Excellency, the Deputy Minister from Turkey, to please join me. And I'd also like to invite Mr. Martin Bachmann to the stage to also join us. And I would like to take also the opportunity to introduce Dr. Ali Al-Yabhouni, who is the UAE OPEC Governor and also the Chairman of the OPEC Board of Governors, to also join us on the stage. So thank you very much. Martin, please. Please. Thank you. We have nice little pink cushions here behind us because these chairs are quite deep and good for supporting the back. That's my first comment of the day. Pink cushions. I'd like to tackle three different subjects in the course of our discussion in terms of new corridors, and they are not in any particular order, but shale, as we've heard a few times this morning and probably 5 million times over the last few months and years, is triggering a new energy corridor, i.e. the US is moving to potentially export posture, and oil and others that were going to America are now looking to maybe having new homes. The second is the Central Asia one, of which Turkey is clearly a major conduit coming out of. And then the third is where we just finished, and that is the sort of east of Suez, the new Silk Road, the corridor to Asia, in which 70% plus of energy out of this region is going to, and where are the dynamics changing in that corridor? And I'd like to start that by bringing Dr. Al-Yabhouni into the conversation and to give his opportunity to give his views on that. He's also the CEO of Abu Dhabi's shipping companies, and so in a good position to look into that even from that point of view. But in terms of the East of Suez corridor, Dr. Al-Yabhouni, what do you see as changes there? I'd like also to just address in your thoughts where sea versus land may come into play in terms of that corridor as we go forward, and in particular the physical land route that China and Pakistan are building to Gawar and to see Gwadar, I should say, in terms of the port that China is looking to build there. What are your views on how that may look in 2020 in the coming years?
Thank you, Sean. You heard me clear. First of all, it gives me great pleasure to be with you here and to join such a distinguished panelist. Of course, and certainly you are touching in a very important area, and when we talk about the dimension of a trade or the new trade, we could call, we are witnessing some areas of changes. However, always will emerge the geographical location, and that's important in terms of long-term relationship, in terms of economics. So many such as these areas could emerge. However, at the same time, you cannot stay static. You get to come up with creative thinking in terms of forthcoming services and develop, I would say, or cementing the partnership between, I would say, national oil companies such as the Gulf region national oil companies with their partners. For example, if we look at ADNOC, our traditional market, east of Suez, Japan, Korea, certainly India, and other areas. So with no doubt, there has been a lot of steps has been taking place to cement this relationship. And this relationship, for example, been developed more than 40 years.
Can the UAE, as His Honourable
Yes.
His Excellency from Sri Lanka indicated, the UAE can emerge as a major hub on this corridor now, with East Africa possibly becoming a major source of supply, that not only of your own energy moving west, or moving east rather, but also facilitating others with the development of Fujairah as a possible point for that. Is that something that the UAE would see a role, a greater role, do you think?
The development and of the export from East Africa and also from Latin America, that's no doubt, and this is not new. It will continue gradually, but all in all, you will find better economics, better geographical location, better partnership. The region where is over here can provide all these services. Certainly, having a terminals and the role of Fujairah activities over there, that will play an active role in terms of, as I said, will provide an excess or extra services where your traditional customers will look into that you are providing services where you get closer to them. Not only the development in Fujairah, you could, for example, I will use ADNOC activities as an example, by putting storage farms in Korea, by putting storage farms in Japan, by putting in offices in Singapore, where you are getting closer to your clients.
May I just bring in Your Excellency on that question I mentioned earlier on the development, the Chinese development of the plan for a rail infrastructure out of China, 2,000 kilometers to Gwadar in Pakistan, and that physical, rather than going by the sea. You're obviously the conduit for a lot of on-land transport of 5 million barrels a day. What are your views on that China-Gwadar corridor? Do you think it will happen? Will it become significant?
Now, in fact, in that part of the world, in the eastern part of Turkey, any project, so long it's economical, will have a great chance of to be realized. The economic aspect of those pipeline projects or train projects are much more prevalent than other aspects of these giant projects. When we come to the our part of the world, I'll talk about that part especially. Now, of course, two factors are important. First, the gas market, whether we will have a global gas market or not, will be very important. And secondly, whether the oil prices will remain as it is or will go up, will determine the economic feasibility of these projects. And if you ask me my prediction, I don't expect oil prices to go down despite all the shale gas and technological advancements. It will go up. The world will continue to depend on hydrocarbons. Despite all the technological developments in an electricity sector, in nuclear, in others. For that reason, I personally believe that the chances of having this China train project is higher than not having it.
Yeah, I'd like to bring you in to talk a little bit about the idea in this corridor. We're seeing centers of great consumption emerge. We talked about some reference Africa, I think His Excellency, but Africa is also going to become a significant consumer of its own energy. The Middle East is becoming a significant consumer of its own energy. China, if it develops its own resources, how is that going to impact, do you think, the traditional Gulf supplies energy to the far remote corners of Asia? How do you see any change with that as regions become big energy producers, become big consumers?
I mean, what we're seeing, I think, we're seeing it today already, is this increase in competition in actually for supply. Yeah? And I think it's, well, I mean, you mentioned this, do we have a global gas market? Do we have a regional gas market? In the end, it is a global market of one form or the other. Whether it is a global market in terms of a unified price is a different question. But in terms of attracting supply, it is clearly a global market. Yeah? And I mean, we see the sort of pull from Asia. I mentioned gas markets here for a moment. Yeah, we see that pull in Europe. Yeah, we see that very, very clearly. There is a competition for gas supply from Asia, which is felt in Europe. I mean, Europe as an indigenous gas producer is declining, so it has an increasing need for gas imports, even in a relatively stagnant market at the moment. Yeah. And of course, you start.
Is Europe willing to pay LNG prices?
Well, at the moment, I don't think it doesn't have to pay Asian LNG prices, yeah, because I mean some of the projects you've mentioned, yeah, with Chaldenis coming into, but the effect is felt in Europe of that LNG going east, yeah. I mean, if you look at European regas terminals, they probably operate at below 50% capacity at the moment because the LNG goes to higher price market. So I think even when there isn't a physical connection from one to the other, I think the competition for the supply, the competition for capital for the supply projects, be that long distance pipeline, be that LNG, be that shale gas, by the way, will be felt across the world, I think.
You know, we saw one of the survey results that indicated OPEC consumption of its own oil production is going to grow to 30, as high as 40%. Some voted. What, as an Asian country looking to the Gulf and this region as a major energy supplier, as you mentioned, to the years ahead, what are your views on that? How does that affect, how should it affect policy in Asia?
Actually, we have to ask Asians' point of view. We still believe that the Gulf region is our supplier. I don't think it will be changed in the near future. But
Saudi Arabia now consumes 1/4 of its own
but
oil production.
Even then, the market is here. Now,
The what?
Market is here, because the Gulf region, there will be more sellers to the Asian market than any other region in the world. So definitely the market will be here. So even the consumption go up in the Gulf region, the products that are available for the Asian market which will always be from here. And the other thing is, if there is a change, I believe, because of the pipeline that they have mentioned to the Pakistan. If the Pakistani becomes a exporter of oil to other countries, definitely then it will affect the market here. And the other thing is that we have now seen the India and Sri Lanka is also exploring oil and gas reserves in the Kaveri basin in the Indian Ocean. So if we are successful, yes, in the future, then India and Sri Lanka also will be coming to the market, not in big way, in a small way. But practically, the situation will remain same in the region, where the Gulf region will definitely be the main source of energy supply to Asia.
Okay.
If I may chip in here, you hear me clear here?
Yep.
if I may chip in over here and to address the concern of Gulf region in terms of increasing their domestic consumption. Yes, the domestic consumption is increasing, no doubt.
All OPEC.
You are right. However, they are making at the same time huge investments in terms of sustaining their production capacities, expanding their refining capacities, and also, since I would say my beloved shipping in this part, we are making a lot of investments in the shipping side of the business here. So, in a sense, I don't see that a huge concern, or should be that big concern, in terms of that will be less export or less, could be a sense of security of supply coming from the Gulf region. This is no doubt well addressed, as you heard speech of His Excellency the Minister of Energy addressed by the Undersecretary, sharing with you that UAE diversifying its sources of supplies, which means that leaving its hydrocarbon excess or hydrocarbon supplies not to create that big disturbance to it. At the same time, certainly ADNOC making huge investments in its expansion, its production, putting a huge refining capacity, more than 400,000 barrels per day. So I think that should send the signals that there will be a security of supply, or OPEC producing countries acting in terms of responsible suppliers.
Okay. Can we just move across to the United States and to the impact of shale and the idea of the US becoming a energy exporter, and not only that, but the impact on, let's say, West African oil, Angola, Nigeria, and what are the dynamics that will change there? Martin, if you might give us your views on that.
I mean, very clearly, if I mean, we've seen it in the voting, if we believe that, let's say, North America is going to be self-sufficient, that will have great impact on the trade patterns across the world, yeah, and especially from, of course, the traditional supply areas into the North American continent. However, we shouldn't forget this happens against a backdrop of many countries which traditionally may even have been exporting countries becoming importing countries, yeah. So while we will see a shift of trade patterns, I don't necessarily see that we will see a complete reversal of the picture of, I mean, if I can call it a little bit dramatically, a scramble for supply. Yeah, I don't think that will happen. I mean, you mentioned the shale gas, the tight oil, and all that. I think it's a very significant move, very clearly, in the United States. I think when we think of it globally, I think the time frame involved in even approaching something which has been done in North America, in the US, is generally vastly underestimated. I mean, we are at the very beginning, if you want, of a data collection exercise, at the very beginning of actually understanding what we're talking about when we're talking unconventional oil and gas. And I think that to believe that you will see a replication of what you've seen on the same time frame as in the United States, I think is, in my view, unrealistic.
Okay. Your Excellency?
In fact, shale gas and oil development in the United States will probably have minimal impact on global supply of gas and oil. However,
in what sense? Minimal in the sense of
in the
clearly,
sense of
if
the
America
dynamics,
doesn't need to import oil, that's a big change.
the dynamics.
If you're
of
Angolan, you might say something different.
let me tell you this: the dynamics of oil and gas market will not be affected heavily by the developments in the United States. However, there are two factors which are important and which never should be overlooked. One is the shift of industry from non-American countries, which are energy-dependent industries like steel, aluminum industries, will probably shift from more expensive, more costly countries to United States, and we've been observing this. Some of the European factories are being closed down, for instance.
Even
And
moving from China.
and even moving from China. And also, for instance, today on the paper, I've read that Volkswagen will invest $7 billion in the United States. So that will have indirect impact. The shift of industries from non-American countries to the United States and to America will definitely have impact on the jobs being created and also on the wealth being created.
Do you think it will trigger the likes of China, for example, to develop its own shale reserves in order to have access to cheaper energy supply?
Of course, every country and every community will struggle for cheaper energy. So no matter what's happening in other parts of the world, China will definitely seek for getting cheaper and cheaper energy. Whether they will be successful or not, of course, depends on new explorations and new technological developments. And the second factor, which is probably important, in my opinion, is that the non-hydrocarbon production will have a negative impact. For instance, coal industry will probably be under stress more than oil and gas, because coal industry is heavily used in industries, in industrial production.
But we're seeing coal move out of America into Europe as a result of...
As a result of it, will be cheaper, and we'll have, coal prices will be suppressed, in my opinion, because of this indirect impact of shale gas production.
Just bring in Dr. Al-Yabhouni. Maybe OPEC invites the United States to become a member as a net exporter, but all things are possible. But please.
One more thing. I'm not quite sure whether U.S. will ever export its excess gas and oil, knowing the fact that it's value added domestically, its additional value added created domestically will probably be higher than exporting oil and gas directly. So for that reason, I don't think that U.S. in general will strive for exporting oil and gas.
Even if they don't, Ali, they still will not call on Angolan oil. If Brazil develops a massive capacity, it will have to probably find markets elsewhere in the world. What is your thoughts on the impact of shale in America on a new corridor?
I think the media or the analysts or speculators, you may call them, they are a bit overreacting to the issue of shale oil, shale gas. But let me take this in terms of, I would say, perspective, that we believe that all energy mix are needed. Let's put it like this. All energy mix are needed in terms of nuclear, in terms of hydro, in terms of bio, whatever you name it. So non-conventional oil, this is not a new phenomenon. It has been all the time. What's driving the non-conventional oils? Certainly the oil prices. So if the oil prices stayed at a level where feasible to make the development of across the board of energy mix, let it be it. This is a great thing for all a human being and for all our industry and for all our business. I don't see and I don't understand why some look at this as a threat in terms of OPEC producing countries. In contrary, we are OPEC producing member, and we are looking at different energy mix. Are they economics? I would say not as economics as fossil fuel, but it's important to have. So
I suppose the bigger picture, as we saw in the vote earlier, it's taking a look to 2020, whether from a supplier's point of view, is it going to be a supplier's market or a buyer's market, and who is going to be the weaker or stronger player in that as all of these new supplies come on stream?
I believe the vote demonstrated that clearly the market will be balanced,
Yes.
equilibrium, supply and demand.
I think
And,
Richard
and,
might have
and the
fixed
prices
that, I
will
don't know.
stay at this level. So
Let's
this is the way how I see it.
Let's just conclude with the, Your Excellency, the Turkey's place in the world and the whole Central Asian landlocked energy supply, now 5 million barrels a day you mentioned going through Turkey. Can you just start with addressing the subject of Kurdistan, the headlines flowing in the last few days? Will Turkey move forward on the pipeline from Kurdistan through Turkey without the blessing of Baghdad?
That's a very tough question.
That's why I asked.
And I know everyone,
You are a tough man. You can handle it.
Yeah.
and everyone expecting me to answer that question directly, which I won't.
Okay.
Uh,
Answer it in a roundabout way.
Let me tell you one thing.
Yes.
In general, anything that is capable of flowing will flow.
Unless it's going uphill.
One way or the other. Whether it's in Iraqi oil or East Mediterranean gas basin, which we've never told,
Yeah.
and which
Yep.
which will have a potential.
Your neighbors Cyprus are moving well ahead.
Israel, but in our part of the world, the equation is quite different than others. Our part of the world is more politically oriented. All these projects that are economically feasible, probably much more feasible than any other projects, are very much politically oriented than other parts of the world.
Well, that's clearly the ultimate point in any of these energy corridors, isn't it? The security, that's the geopolitical stability. You mentioned it in your own speech. So coming back to the same question again, would it be geopolitically wise in order for the stability of your neighborhood to action a pipeline that doesn't have the sovereign blessing of the government of Iraq?
Of course, Turkey, again, indirect answer. I'm going to have to tell you this. Turkey definitely acknowledges the sovereignty of Iraq. Turkey fully agree to abide by the constitution of Iraq. Whatever the constitution says, Turkey will have to honor this. Will honor this, and of course the internal dynamics between Kurdish government (KRG) and Iraqi government is their own responsibility and is their own problem. Of course, we will help them to resolve their issues, to resolve their problems, because as I told you as I told to the audience in my opening remark, political stability in that region is the most important issue. So don't expect me to say anything that will hamper this delicate relationship between KRG and Maliki government. So we are working very hard to have both of them come to terms and to have the oil flow. Oil will flow eventually. How? We will see. I don't know. I won't tell you. Oil will flow, gas will flow because the world will demand it. Will continue to demand it. So this is the most I can tell you, no matter in what manner you ask that question, in what different style you ask that question to me.
We have a former Iraqi minister in the audience who might comment on it later, but Martin, your thoughts, just widening that in terms, you've formerly with Shell, formerly based in Turkey and Caspian region. Do you have the same sort of optimistic outlook for the role of Turkey in that corridor? And will Europe demand be so great that looking for an alternative to Russia, that Turkey and Central Asian energy and Iraq and so on will flow through Turkey?
I mean, maybe as a starting point, one always talks as an alternative too. Yeah, I think we're having to think of and not either or.
Right.
Yeah? Because I think energy demand will rise. Yeah, we will need diversification, and that's exactly where that comes in. Yeah, we do see a change in patterns of demand. So I mean, a lot of the European infrastructure needs adapting to that demand. I mean, Southeastern Europe is growing in demand, needs more demand. So I do think, and I fully agree with your statement, what flows will eventually flow, yeah? And gas under pressure will eventually go somewhere, yeah? And I think it's in the end an economic question. What can be made to happen most economically at the time it is needed? And I think Turkey, I mean, as you said, I've lived in Turkey for 3 years, I think is, of course, geographically extremely well placed at this crossroads between the great supply centers and the demand centers.
Well, I'll conclude the session there and move to the final before coffee break. I'd like to thank our panelists, and we're all available for follow-up in the coffee break. If you want to challenge or question anything they said, please do so. So thank you, Dr. Al-Yabhouni, Your Excellency, Martin, Your Honourable. Thank you very much for your participation.
Pleasure.
Thank you.